So I was about 10 days into the ride to Alaska when I found myself thinking, why am I working 45 or 50 hours a week for Emory when I could be out doing this? So I resolved when I got back, Emory was getting a new director of libraries, and if I really bonded with the guy, I would stay as long as I was welcome. Otherwise, I planned to sunset at December 31st, 2008. And a friend of mine once said, working at this place is like riding a donkey with saddlebags. One bag is being filled with gold, the other is being filled with manure. When the donkey tips one way or the other, or just falls down, it's time to get off. My donkey collapsed. So, having decided to retire at the end of 2008, I dreaded it. I was biggest worry, and I suspect I share this with everybody in this room, for someone who lives by his mind, is how do you keep your brain going and avoid brain rot. It turned out it wasn't a problem. John's seminars, I think I participated in 3 of them, so a lot of the faces here I recognize. They were very helpful to me for relearning the art of close reading of long texts, which is a vanishing art in this country. We now have a president who limits himself to 140 character tweets. So I've been riding motorcycles since I was 15, including riding from London to Istanbul. And North Georgia is one of the great riding areas in this country. So we had a cabin on the east side of Dahlonega, decided in the winter of 2017 that it was time to leave Atlanta behind and move up there full time. The cabin we had was a little small for 2 people and 50 years worth of crap. So we found a place on the other side of town which has a double garage, one for the car, one for the motorcycles. And it's a quarter mile from a winery. So that's just paradise. How many of you have never been to Dahlonega? A few, okay. Dahlonega is about 60 miles north of Atlanta. It was the site of the first North American gold rush. And the gold was one of the reasons that the Cherokees were booted out and sent on the Trail of Tears by Governor Lumpkin, if I remember, and Dahlonega is the county seat of Lumpkin County. The town is about 5,000 people, but it's got a university with about 7,500 students, and that completely changes the vibe from what you would expect in small town Georgia in a rural area. We live about 6 miles outside of town. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, the Friday after Thanksgiving, I saw 14 wild turkeys march across our yard. And this morning, about a mile from the house, I saw a dead deer carcass on the road, which I swerved around. There are cows down the road. There's a lot of gunfire from people practicing their hunting skills. And we're about 5 miles from Camp Merrill, which is a Ranger, U.S. Army Ranger training camp. So we moved in 2017. In the fall of 2017, I started worrying again about keeping my mind active and started looking around at what I could do in the way of studying a foreign language. Checked the catalog at University of North Georgia, and I was astounded that they have a large Near Eastern Studies program. They have 5 people teaching Arabic, 2 full-time, 1 part-time, I'm missing 3 full-time, excuse me, 1 part-time and a TA. So I wrote the guy who was teaching intermediate Arabic, introduced myself, said, here's why I think I can take an intermediate course, explain my background, and he said, oh, Roger Ramuni was my uncle. He was my first teacher of Arabic at the University of Michigan. And I said, well, after I graduated Michigan, I went out to UCLA. He said, oh, I went to UCLA. And we got talking, and I told him I got out of the PhD program in history because I needed Turkish, Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, Persian, because there's a lot of Persian in Ottoman Turkish, and as my Hungarian Ottoman instructor said, German. We had 4 people in an Ottoman class. He handed out a homework assignment, which was a 15th century poem. One guy had a background in Turkish, that was me. One had a background in Persian. One had a background in Arabic, and one was a Turk. All of the footnotes to the poem were in German. Sir, none of us speaks German. Well, if you want to be in this field, you have to know German. So it was just too much, and I discovered that librarians didn't have 2 heads, and went into that, and I've been happy as a clam. Now, the interesting part is my Arabic instructor went through exactly the same thing. He was going to get a PhD in Arabic, I think, and first they told him he needed another language other than Spanish. So choosing between German and French, he chose French. Second year of his program, he had a paper due that involved Aramaic. And they said, well, you've got to learn Aramaic too. And he did the same thing. So he's now working on a PhD at Georgia State on pedagogy for foreign language teaching. So I showed up in class about a week after the second semester started last winter, and had the textbook, and I hadn't touched the language for 45 years. Well, hadn't fully studied it. I hadn't used it since we left Saudi Arabia in 1983. And it was a scary moment because Arabic is just a bear of language. It's the most difficult task I've ever undertaken. So I walk into class and here are all these students, and I realize, oh, I'm old enough to be these kids' grandfather. But to my surprise, after about 3 weeks, I was catching up and things were coming back faster than I expected. First the written language and then the spoken language. So I applied. Georgia has this wonderful program for people over 62 where for a $30 application fee, you can take as many courses as you want at any college, any campus in the university system of Georgia for free. The only limit is that you can't register until the first day of class, and if the class is full, you can't take it. That's not a problem with Arabic classes. So I sent off for my transcripts from UCLA and Michigan. I was admitted. I blew off the orientation stuff until the weekend before classes began. Checked and found that there were 3 holds on my record. I couldn't register. 1, I needed a letter proving that I had a tetanus shot. 2, I needed to provide a high school diploma. And 3, I hadn't met any of the prerequisites for the course. So I stopped by the registrar's office and I said, look, I've got a BA from Michigan and an MLS from UCLA. Do you really need a high school diploma? And they said, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? So that was okay. Got the tetanus shot record to document and got the departmental secretary in Arabic to get the special permission to sit in the class. So that was last semester. It was an introduction to the Quran. The first day the instructor walked in, he said, when you walk through that door, leave your religion behind. This course is not about religion or faith. It's about culture and Arabic. So he and I have gotten along wonderfully. As you might expect, North Georgia is kind of a funny place to be if you're of Middle Eastern background teaching Arabic. There aren't an awful lot of people outside the university to talk with. So at one point, last fall, he said, "You have changed my life. I feel like I'm 15 years ago back in graduate school. It's so nice to be able to correspond with an adult." So we're having a grand time. So one of the reasons, the reason that University of North Georgia has a large language program is that the Military College of Georgia is based in Dahlonega at University of North Georgia. So about 1,500 of the student body are military cadets. About half the students in my classes are military cadets. They either are preparing for deployment somewhere, or they want to go into intelligence, or they want to become spies. When I took Arabic, the standard way to teach it was called Modern Standard Arabic, which is like learning modern standard Latin and going to France or Italy or Spain and expecting people to understand you. So if you want to be a spy and you open your mouth and all you can say is modern standard Arabic, you're doomed. So partly because I had studied Arabic for 4 years and lived in Saudi Arabia for 5 years, even though my skills are rusty, I bring a tremendous amount of life experience to the classes. And I have to force myself to hold back so that the instructor will ask a question and he'll look at me and I'll look back at him and he'll keep looking at me. And eventually either he looks at somebody else or I answer with minimum answer possible and hope that you can tease additional details out of the other students. Some of them are really, really bright, and I'm a ringer in some ways, and B, and worse for them, they're taking full course loads. And in the case of military cadets, that they've got their military school responsibilities. I'm retired. I'm taking one, or this semester, 2 courses. Got nothing better to do with my life. So I can put as many hours into prep as I need to. And despite 4 years of formal study and 5 years living in Saudi Arabia, I'm really, really slow. Has anybody here ever studied Arabic other than Andre? Okay. You need an entire years of study just to be able to use the dictionary to find things, because it's not organized like any other dictionary you've ever seen. And I'm at the point where probably 25% of the words I encounter when I'm reading, I have to look up. And it's gradually getting better. The other thing that is frustrating for a 72-year-old freshman is memory is unpredictable. So I'll remember something from 50 years ago like that, but I can't remember vocabulary I supposedly learned yesterday. But it all works out. So this semester, I'm taking a second semester of Introduction to Islam and something that I've always wanted to do, which is calligraphy. Let's see if I can find it. I found this bookmark in a book last week. It's a quote from Philip Hitti, who was chairman of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton forever. And he says, wisdom has alighted on three things: the brains of the Franks, the hands of the Chinese, and the tongue of the Arabs. It's hard to overemphasize the importance of the language in Arabic culture, especially the Quran, but also poetry. In the pre-Islamic times, there was a trade fair in southwestern Saudi Arabia where they would have an annual poetry competition. And the winner of, and this would be people basically rapping ad hoc against each other, and the winner, got a horse or something. The other thing with the language is that Arabic culture is, and Islamic culture in general, is much, much more tightly linked to their holy book, the Quran, than Western culture. So the two are indistinguishable. And this semester, we are focusing on Quranic Arabic. So that's 622 onward. So here I am reading stuff, or attempting to read stuff, written in the 7th century. Is anybody here from a background of religion? Okay. We came upon this surah last week, and it seems really simple, but my lack of religious education went right over my head. There's a verse called the fig, and it starts, just first 3 lines are the fig and the olive, the Mount Sinai, and the secure city. So what does that mean? The words are really easy. The fig and the olive are Jesus. Mount Sinai is Moses. And the secure city is Mecca, the Muhammad's city. No way I was ever going to figure out that if it hadn't been explained to me. He said he was riding in a taxi cab in Jordan, and he said to the driver, the fig and the olive. And the driver says, Jesus. Well, it's a cultural thing. So aside from the fact that the language is archaic in some ways, there are all sorts of cultural references and metaphors that are not at all obvious. And I'm realizing that the Quran is way harder than just studying Arabic in some ways. The way that it's not harder is Arabic is a Semitic language, so it's built around 3-letter combinations. And like Hebrew, it writes the consonants, but not the vowels, except for Quranic Arabic, where you've got the full vocalization. So it's actually easier to read than modern Arabic. It's harder to understand, but it's easier to read. Calligraphy. Does anybody know what this is? Andre? Had a qalam. So a qalam is an Arabic pen or calligrapher's pen made from a reed. Ideally, I harvested these about 3 weeks ago from a bamboo patch that was nearby. The proper way to make a qalam is to bury the reeds in bull manure. I don't know why bull manure rather than cow manure, for 6 months. I baked them in my oven for 6 days. So my ink should be arriving today, and I'm going to get to actually start experimenting with this. There are 2 things that I'm hoping to get out of the calligraphy course. One is how to carve one of these properly. I think I'm already pretty way far there. And the other is to write my name in the form of a tughra. Tughra is an Ottoman formal signature. It looks kind of like that, and then it's got 3 vertical lines, and buried in the middle or the bottom is the actual name. The snail shape and the lines are just kind of a package for it. And I didn't know that until recently. And oh, one thing I forgot. Last fall, I reached out to, and this is why I'm so disappointed that Gretchen's not here today. I reached out to her for advice on poetry because I had an assignment that called for translating a surah from the Quran in rhymed verse. Anybody who's ever done translation, and especially translating poetry, knows that poetry is usually the first thing that's lost in the translation. When you're dealing with two languages that have essentially nothing in common, it's really difficult. And I was astounded with some hints from Gretchen. I not only came up with 4 lines with the same rhyme scheme as the original, but the same number of syllables per line. So I had to twist the meaning a little bit to do that, but that's, you know, the meaning is more important than the words in this case. So that's basically what I've got to say. I'm having the time of my life. Last Friday, I submitted an application to be an Arabic tutor at the Dahlonega University of North Georgia Summer Language Institute. The job requirements include all the usual stuff, but it runs from June 15th through July 31st, and the job description says, must be willing to work 7 days a week and participate in extracurricular activities. So we'll see if I get the job or not. But the instructor said, oh, you'd be perfect for that. So.
Well, that was fascinating, and I'm very, very jealous of Selden for going back to school with time off. I went back to school always while working, which was kind of interesting, and as many in this room, or some of you in this room may have a similar experience, as good at being a Pied Piper for doing things as John Buga was, so indeed is Brenda Bynum. And Brenda was the one that got me involved in theater at a reception of several of us who were on the President's Commission on the Status of Women. President Chase had just come in, and we put on this dinner for various women to come hear the new president. And we sat in back, and as these things happened, we drank and had a good time. I mean, we couldn't be heard, I don't think, but anyway, we were having a marvelous time, and I expounded on, you know, I'm a fabulous teacher. I did all kinds of teaching awards, and I've always thought that I would just be wonderful at theater. At which Brenda and Leslie Harris looked at each other and said, yeah, I think I can be arranged. And before I knew it, I was trying out to be in a staged reading. And soon after that, we were involved in, God knows how, actually, Andy Namias remembers, we were directed by Wole Soyinka to do, which had been a radio play, and should have stayed a radio play, I might add. But we were doing it as a reading, and they kept giving us more and more instruction about, oh yes, and you want to do this, and each of us was assigned someone from the theater department on how to do this, and I would say yes, yes, and then ask one of the students, what am I supposed to do? So I realized, you know, I really need to take some theater classes to understand about a build and various terms. So I did. So I took theater classes, and I got so I could enroll in a theater class every semester while still working at the university. At the time, I was the director of continuing medical education and biomedical media, and also was still going to Grady Hospital and seeing patients. So it involved a little bit of finagling, and I was kind of embarrassed to be called and be at a class across the campus I was Dr. McKay on this side, and I was Marilynne over there. So it was different. And I told my staff, I said, well, I'm in a class. And they said, well, we just say you're in a class. I said, you can't do that. And they said, well, they think you're teaching it. Oh, I said, that's one of those things you can do. So that was nice. So I started taking classes from Alice Benston, who was a marvelous, marvelous person. My first class was from her called Reading for Performance. And it's about how you read and think about what you're reading. How would I stage this? Who's talking, and something about French scenes, which I thought was just some silly thing Alice made up. And it turns out to be the key to all of reading things. And that's every time there's an entrance of one character, someone comes on stage or someone goes off or both, that's a French scene. And it's how you keep track of who's on stage at any given time. And you have to lay these things out. I found Excel to be very helpful. And then you know if you can double characters, if somebody can play two roles, because those two characters never appear on stage at the same time. So it's mechanics, but really, I thought that was so swell. I did more, and so I took speeches and monologues so I could understand things a little bit better. And then I got into lighting and design, and that was, oh my, that was the best. And so when I decided that I needed to retire, we had a new chairman. But Tom Lawley came in as chairman, not because I didn't like Tom Lawley, but because it was just more and more things. I was doing too much. I said, let's go back to New Mexico. I'm from New Mexico originally, and that would be really fun to go there. And, you know, I can probably do some other things. Maybe I could, well, I worked full-time for an HMO. That's what I did. I meant to only work part-time, but got talked into being, we really need you. And then the person who hired me left and said, you'd be a marvelous chair. I've told them that. So, oh good. So I got to do that for about 3 years. And then I thought, well, you know, I really don't have to work every day. Maybe I could just work part-time. So I was just thinking of things to do. And I asked my friends, my best friends from college, and I'm actually starting in junior high, some of them, to join their book club, because that's kind of what retirees do. And they said, well, you know, we've had this club going for a very long time. But we have kind of two factions, and one of the factions, we wouldn't let their friend in, so I'm afraid we can't invite you. What? I can't come into your book club, and these are my friends that start. So I went home, and my husband said much the same and started laughing. Why don't you just take some theater classes? The theater classes, well, that's right. The university has a theater department. I could go and do that. So I went in I took a couple of theater classes, and I was terrific. And I remembered what I heard. The students, they'd show up and kind of, maybe they came to class and maybe they didn't. And I was always right there, you know. I read the play, and it was contemporary theater. I thought, well, that would be nice. And I said, well, now what? Ron said, just enroll, just take classes, you know. Don't bother me with what you're doing. Just enroll. So I went down, and Sheldon said, well, what did you need? Well, I needed more than a tetanus shot. I had, not because New Mexico is that far out in the wilds, and we really don't have that much plague in Albuquerque itself. But the thing that was the hardest was they needed a letter from at least one of my professors. Well, I did go there as an undergraduate. I, at the time, was 50-something, and I was 40 years ago, and they were all dead. And so I explained that they were dead, and what should I do? Well, surely, no, sorry, I graduated in 1964. It's been a while. It's been a minute, as we say in the South. So I was fortunate enough to find that the chairman of the Department of Theater Studies had a colleague who was in the School of Medicine. And I had gone to med school there, and that one I graduated in 1976. So I bought another few years, and he remembered me, and he was kind enough to write a letter. Unbelievable. What do you do? You know, who knew? So I got enrolled in the classes, and the way I took them was I had found that I could work 3 days a week, which is what I wanted to do anyway, and I'd either leave off Tuesday and Thursday or Monday and Wednesday, because classes were Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday. So I managed to take all the classes, so I could take the classes to enroll in a master's program in directing, which they had, and it was in the Department of Theater and Dance. So that seemed like it would be just dandy, except the guy that taught the directing was an English professor, and they had a new chairman of English, and they said, "What are you doing over there in theater? I'm putting you in charge of the graduate students." And so it went. The legs were cut out from under it, and it became kind of a lame duck program, with me quacking away in that situation. So I continued to take the classes, but I then had to do research for my thesis, and I got, as faculty would, I got involved in my idea for a thesis was to study the shows that students put on at the end of graduation of medical school. And they do put on a show, and they're typical shows. They always have something to do with women having babies the first time you saw that, the first time you saw it transsexual, the first time you did, I don't get enough sleep, I don't get enough sex, I don't get enough to eat, I ate too much. They're same themes that keep going through. But what's interesting is that there was a time when I was here at Emory when they put on those shows, and they became meaner and meaner about the faculty. Students were more and more upset during the 60s and 70s, and they finally had to say, no, we don't think we want to do those anymore. And yet they thrived at Yale, at Harvard, at other places, and I wondered why they are now thriving, and in fact the faculty acts in them. And it turned out that they did have a hiatus. They went completely bottomed out, and then came back, and now they sell the opportunity, auction the opportunity to be in the show for a faculty member, to play yourself, if you're lucky. It's much kinder. Anyway, the whole idea of doing this and writing how they've changed was fascinating, but try looking up things like theater, in medicine and theater. It's operating theater. Oh, okay. Medical and plays. Yes, play therapy for children. Could we do, everything else I found, it turned out it was sociology and ethnography, folk tales done, which is kind of what it is. It's folk tales you do at a certain time in your life, and there is a rich history of that. By the time I finished doing the research, I would have had to write a book, a thick book, and I said, do I really need another degree? Actually, not so much. But I did do all the coursework and qualified for it. But by then, one of my professors, junior professors, who was very important to me as a mentor, went to work in Kansas, thank you. And I came back to Atlanta, and finally I said, that's enough. So what do I do with this degree in theater? Well, as it turns out, there's a program in Atlanta called the Susie Bass Awards, which are the Tonys for Atlanta. And I've been a Susie Bass judge since 2012. And that's been ever so much fun. Sometimes I have to see, I think my high was 90 plays in a year, but usually it's somewhere between 40 and 70, depending on whether I'm doing just musicals, just plays, or both, because we can't get enough theater. And these are Atlanta's professional theaters, just the professional theaters, not the things that come through at the Fox. Doesn't count. The amateur theater doesn't count because we're trying to get the theaters to pay their actors. And so it has a goal other than that. But it's been wonderful. I can still take classes. Now, I didn't know that if you were 62, I knew you could take free classes. But it doesn't matter if you have another degree already. See, I thought maybe that was the problem.
I looked at my student status, it says freshman.
Oh, well, this was another thing, though. If you want to do it like at a university like Emory, Eleanor Main, thank goodness, was the one who counseled me when I went in to take my first class. And she said, yes, you can, we'll get you in graduate school. I'm in the ladies' graduate school. And I said, well, now I can take it for pass-fail, or I can take it for non-degree. Or she said, well, take it for a degree, for heaven's sake. That way you'll take it seriously. And that was lovely. So I can. And because I didn't finish getting my master's, I could keep taking undergraduate classes forever, perhaps, which is also a nice way to look at it. So I don't think Emory qualifies. I paid for all of mine, my God. And it was charged against my salary, there's no free rides at Emory. But I did get it pretty much free at UNM because it was a cheap school. So of all these things, you set the standard. I got into an honorary. I was inducted into Phi Kappa Phi, which is an all-encompassing. Phi Beta Kappa is for liberal arts, but Phi Kappa Phi, if you're at a school that has that, it's kind of for everything, including old women taking theater classes. But it was, I had better than a 4-point average. You could actually get the plus counted for something. And it was like, oh yeah, they were fun. So that's enough for taking real classes at real schools. You can, and why not? I keep telling Ron to go over to Georgia Tech and take some robotics classes. And he says someday, soon. Although he's still working at the chiropractic college doing research. I said, oh no, take classes. It's a good thing for you. So the other thing, just in passing, let me mention that I'm taking courses in Coursera, online classes, and I've specialized in taking classes in teaching art, given from the Museum of Modern Art. And these are many of the techniques that are used at the High Museum when you take classes of you. Not me, not you probably, but if you wanted to take children through and teach them about art, it's how to do it, how to get them to concentrate on things. Sometimes something like a little 2x2, the frame from a Kodachrome slide. They don't know what Kodachrome slides are, but all you need is the frame, and then you can have them look at just one part of a picture, which is kind of a neat way to teach. So Coursera will help you. You can learn anything you want on Coursera, but specifically you can get little certificates that will get you to have some credentials if you want to go on and do something else. But Holly she's the master of the online class, I think.
In the early 2000s, actually the last few years before I retired, people were really starting to talk about MOOCs. And most of my colleagues seemed to have the idea that this was something that was sent from the devil. This was going to end life as we knew it. It was never going to be the same. It was a terrible thing for education. Now that we've stood back from it a little bit, it's turned out, I believe it's turned out that it's not quite the way we thought it was going to be. It didn't end things. Instead, it was an addition to things. And my thinking at the time also was, I was looking at retirement and I was thinking, I think they look like a wonderful thing. I'm going to have this time after I retire and I can explore all these different opportunities to learn things that I didn't even know I was interested in, perhaps. So when I started out, the first MOOC I took actually was in conjunction with an academic learning community in Emory College on the future of higher education. And Kathy Davidson, who had written a book on the history, she writes a lot on tech, and she had written a lot on the effect of technology on teaching. She was at Duke at the time, and she did her first MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, is what MOOC stands for. Her first was on the history and future of higher education, and we sort of looked at this together. So this was a face-to-face situation where we were looking at something that was also online, and we could look at the online components on our own time, and then we could also discuss those topics in addition to what we had for our academic learning community. So that was the first, and this was on Coursera. Emory also had was developing courses on Coursera, has some very popular ones. Not a large catalog, but still some very good ones. Some of the other courses, as I would open up the Coursera, they would suggest things for me. Often they would be kind of off the wall. I couldn't figure out why they were telling me to do something about tech or something about business. I thought, I guess they don't have a very good algorithm for seeing who might be interested. But the ones that I found on my own, one of the first ones was listening to classical music, something that I had studied actually, active listening to the music as an undergraduate way back then, but I could certainly use a review after a few years. There was a course on Gothic cathedrals, which fascinated me because I had actually taught about Gothic cathedrals during the study abroad program in France, and this show some other cathedrals that I have not had a chance to visit in other countries as well. I took one on film studies called Love and Marriage in the Movies, which was a lot of fun. And there was one on Shakespeare and community, and I have since found others on Shakespeare that took place in England on other platforms than Coursera, and they would be coordinated with an actual performance that was coming up. And then you could sometimes see a performance or a recording of that performance. I mean, well, a recording, obviously, of the performance. But things got serious when I discovered the Iowa International Writers Program. I had always thought that I might want to write fiction at some point in my life. And so they had an online fiction course. I was fascinated by that. And so I immediately signed up. It was free, as many of the MOOCs are free unless you want a certificate, in which case I started actually paying the $50 for the certificate just to show that I'm supporting the thing. And then you sometimes get a little badge by your name when you take something in that course. So I signed up for the Iowa fiction course, but it wasn't for several months. It wasn't going to begin for several months. In the meantime, they had a poetry course. I thought, well, why not? It's free. I mean, nothing to lose. Let's try this poetry. And I'd written poems a little bit during travel sometimes, and as a child I enjoyed writing them. So I thought, well, let's just take a look at that. And after I did the poetry course and really enjoyed it. It was called How Writers Write Poetry, and there would be craft talks by wonderful, wonderful poets. And then you would be given a prompt and write an assignment to write a poem, which you would submit to a forum, a discussion forum, and people would comment on your poem, and you'd comment on theirs. People tend to be very generous and helpful. One of the suggestions we had was, no poem is perfect, so if you could point out what it is you like about it, and then maybe point out something where you didn't quite understand it, or you thought it sort of missed the mark. And so this was sort of the way that we gave constructive criticism, and it was very useful. It's very easy just to say, well, great poem, I love it, but if you actually say why it is that you like that poem, and then say where you think that the poet might do well to look at that again and try to work on it. So I learned an awful lot of that one. Then also took the fiction, but like the poem, with my short attention span, the poetry was much more suited to my work style. After those courses, I took some poetry courses on Coursera and on edX, which is Harvard's platform, on Emily Dickinson, on Walt Whitman. Robert Pinsky, a former poet laureate of the U.S., did a wonderful course on 20th century poetry. And Douglas Kearney, a younger poet, 20th century poet, did one in I think it was California College of the Arts is where his platform was. And then meeting people in these courses, often you kind of meet people in these courses. In the poetry course at Iowa, there were several people who talked about a wonderful course called Modern and Contemporary American Poetry through University of Pennsylvania. And I've kind of touted this one before and tried to get people to take it with me because it starts up every fall. It actually goes on all the time, but it has a special mode where it starts up in the fall and goes on as a fall semester. You can join anytime you want, but if you join it in the fall and actually follow it through, there are live webcasts every week where you can call in, or you can actually go if you happen to be in Philadelphia. You can go and sit there. It's a small, lovely room in the Kelly Writers House. So you get a very personal feel for it, and there are people that you actually meet online and know them. So people that I met in the Iowa course said, hey, take this course. This is a wonderful opportunity, and it's a great course. And we'll meet there. And so we would actually take that course, and then we would meet in a little forum and say, this is anyone who took the Iowa course, if you'd like to meet here, we could meet together here and compare our experiences in the various courses. So that was what got me started on this modern and contemporary American poetry. That course, it's almost has a cult-like following. I've been through it 6 times. The first time I took it, I was asked to come back then and work as what they call a community TA. So I was a community TA, and my function was, there actually is a platoon of these people. I think when I started, there were about 60 of us, and now I think there are probably more. There's several, because there are about 30,000 students that sign up for this each semester, and then many more that take it through the year. But the function as a community TA, you're sort of considered a staffer, unpaid staffer, And you monitor the various forums to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered and make sure that people are being civil, which they generally are. I mean, you've got to be a weird person to decide to go and troll a poetry. Although some people do, but most of the time it's very, it's very civil. And people get passionate about it. It's wonderful to see the different types of people. There are high school students that are in it, and there are some classes that actual high school classes will follow it through. There are college students. There are many, many retired people. I think they are starting to do some research on the data there to see who is in that. Many, many people are scientists, people from all different professions. You can never, maybe you know nothing about poetry when you start off. Maybe, and there are many poets also. There are a lot of accomplished poets and some well-known ones that will sometimes happen in and out of the various forums. So it's it's really a lot of fun. And somehow I'm trying to think, meantime I was writing poetry as well. And I happened, this is the most fun thing that happened yet with it was sometime last year I happened upon a call for applications to a poetry retreat in Umbria. Of course, you can get a retreat anywhere. So, yeah, so it might look nice. And this happened to be, this is from a San Francisco poet named Kim Adonisio, whom I knew through her work. I had read, she wrote a wonderful book on writing poetry called Ordinary Genius. So I really enjoyed that, and I saw that Kim was doing this workshop in Umbria, and I thought you had to apply for it. It was limited applications, and so I thought, well, I mean, of course you pay for the workshop too. I mean, you don't get accepted and have it paid for. You do pay for the workshop. I applied and was accepted for the workshop, and this was an idyllic experience. It was in the summer in Umbria in a 17th century monastery, abandoned monastery that had been refitted to be actually an art, a place for art retreats, visual artist retreats. But also once every year, every 2 years, they would have a poetry retreat. All meals were included. It was family style. You sat there in the hills among the olive groves, and then you'd visit. In the morning, you would visit often one of the hill towns, have a guided tour of the hill town, and then in the afternoons you had for writing to a prompt, and in the evening, with a sufficient amount of wine, you would do your poetry workshop. And again, it was supportive, excellent quality of poems, learned so much. It was really fantastic. So this is an in-person experience, but then I went back to the online experience because Kim, it turns out, has workshops in San Francisco, where she lives, and then she also does online workshops. So I applied for some of those. I did one last spring, and then another one that just started. In fact, I turned a poem in last night, and I'm just shivering to see what people said about it once I get back online to look at their comments. And these workshops, these online workshops, of course you pay for these. And these, whereas the MOOCs that I've taken have all been no charge. These, you pay for them, but you get lots and lots of individual attention, lots of comment on the work that you do. So it's really worthwhile and fun. But the Umbria thing was great. I've got to find some more of those. Those are really good. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to add to that? So that's kind of how an online experience, while face-to-face is probably better in terms of, particularly for those of us who are home a lot after we've retired, in some ways that may be a very, very worthwhile thing to be doing. But on the other hand, some of these online experiences have the advantage of fitting into your schedule however you want to do it. I mean, I even would, in some of these workshop poems, I was traveling, I might have been out of the country, and I could still get my phone and send in, even if I didn't take my laptop with me, send in my poem on my phone. So we're so able to do that we can keep up with these things as we want to. So there are advantages both ways, but I certainly, this has been a very positive aspect of the online experience. I think this might be the time that if you have, does anyone else have an experience, and I will pass you the mic, do you have experiences with other sorts of learning that you've done? Maybe comments on OLLI. Many people have taught in OLLI, and some people have taken courses there. Are there things that anyone would like to comment on at this point? Or questions of anyone, of Shelden, of Marilynne, of me?
namesake, I'm Marilynne McKay's husband, and while she was off doing her thing in New Mexico with the theater, I was doing something a little different. A group of us kind of did take off on lunch and learn, and I guess we could have called it the Society of Autodidacts or something. It turns out that there was a group of us, 4 or 5 PhDs and guests, me in biomedical engineering, a friend in electrical, we had one in economics, one in religion, one in psychology, and we would meet every week or 2 or 3, depending upon how the spirits moved us, and one person would be the moderator and would come up with a topic, and it could be anything, you know, from faith to religion, to energy, to power, you know, to, you know, the world's condition and so on. And he would pick the topic, and it would be up to him to find the material and lead a discussion on it. And at the same time, others, if they chose to, could familiarize themselves with the topic so that at the time we would meet then at a restaurant and have a discussion for a few hours. And it was really very interesting. It was fascinating what we were able to learn with this varied background. And, you know, anybody could do something like this, and it was a great way to spend the time. You know, it was the theater of life for us.
Men, all men. Just saying, all men, I mean, it's informative.
Yes, yes, but it was not by choice. It just fell that way. So, what can I say? Anyhow, it's another form of learning and experience.
Other?
One of the things I did after I retired was to become a master gardener. Took the course for DeKalb County, which was 12 weeks of classes. They do it all in one day now. At the time I was doing it, it was Mondays and Wednesdays for 12 weeks, midterm, final exam, the whole thing. But as a result of that, one of the things that I do now that I really enjoy doing is what the county calls phone duty. I go out to the extension office, and people call garden questions. You know, why does my tomato plant look like this? My grass is like this. What kind of tree is this? And I think it's my background in nursing and in teaching where you kind of draw out what really is the question here. But it's a lot of fun. I do about 100 hours a year and have a great time.
I was going to ask, I think I know the answer, but I was going to ask Shelden. I saw the big dictionary. Is there or has there been any attempt so that you could look it up online, or do you just
Actually, I've got a PDF version of this, and one of the things that came up last week was the grammar that we're using for Quranic Arabic. I read the introduction, and the guy says, well, this is a very fine dictionary. It's completely useless for the Quran. So I asked the instructor, so what is available? And he said, oh, Edward M. Lane. And I looked it up. It was available as a free PDF download, 6,446 pages. He spent 13 years in Cairo gathering materials for it. Then he went back to England to work on it. And after 20 years of writing, he died at his desk at the letter Q, which is the 21st letter, so there were still 8 left to go.
Holly, I just wanted to know how the Pennsylvania course and the Iowa workshop, are those on Coursera? And if not, how did you find them?
The Penn course is on Coursera. The Iowa? The Iowa is, it's on another, I think it's called NovoEd. They had their own platform for a while that was great, but from the University of Iowa International Writers Program website, you can find out. You can find out the information on those.
Since you mentioned poetry, I'll read you the 4 lines that Gretchen coached me on. This is from Surah. Surah is like a psalm, 112, lines 1 through 4. Say, He is Allah, the only unity, Allah, the Lord for all eternity, who has neither parent nor paternity, nor has an equal in all eternity.
So, just a follow-up on that one. So this is a different professor than the one who said to leave religion outside the door?
No, same guy.
Same guy. So, but you can't do that with when you take the Quran.
You can't study Arabic without the Quran.
That's what I thought. Anybody else?
Why is this? Why is that? There are no other literature in.
Oh, there's lots of literature, but it all comes back to the Quran. So it's just so embedded in the entire culture that and of course the course was Introduction to Islam. So that, the religious foundations were part of it.
So Islam was after Quran, or the group of people who were speaking that language?
Oh. Muhammad was a prophet, so as part of the job description of a prophet is to tell people what's coming if they're good and what will happen to them if they're bad. And you usually make a lot of enemies doing that. But it was, I have to start by saying I'm totally agnostic for everything. But from within the Islamic perspective, the Quran was revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. Actually, there was another angel who came down 2 years before, and the story is that the master text is on a golden tablet in heaven, and it's written in God's language. So this other angel comes down, tries to reveal it to Muhammad in God's language, comes back, says, this guy's hopeless, he can't learn a thing. Send someone down who speaks his own language. So it was revealed in Arabic so that his audience would be able to understand what they were hearing. So people memorized his sermons and what he said over the course of his career as a prophet when he died. And they realized that the companions of the prophet are dying off. We better do something about this. So they started writing things down. Things were written down on bone, on shreds of palm leaf, leather, paper, whatever was available. And then could be wrong, about 40 years after his death, they basically did the same thing that happened with the New Testament. They compiled the authoritative version of the Quran, and all the variant texts were burned, just as a lot of things didn't make it into the New Testament. One of them that's really interesting, I think it would surprise most people that Mary is mentioned more times in the Quran than she is in the New Testament. And there is a story in the Quran about Mary traveling with Joseph, and she's thirsty and having labor pains, and she asks him to get her some water. And he says, let the father of the baby get the water for you. So a palm tree bows down, and Jesus from inside her womb says, give my mother some food, and he made a spring come up. Exactly the same story is in what's called the pseudo-gospel of Matthew from about the same time period, and you may have heard it 40, 50 years ago sung by Joan Baez as the Cherry Tree Carol.